So yeah, so let's get started. Let's talk about the incident in Brazil. Now, the first article that I'm going to be reading to you guys is from The Guardian. And the title of the article, and everything is in the description box for the YouTube video, by the way. Protests held across Brazil after councilor shot dead. So, on the eve of her killing on a downtown street on Wednesday night, so this happened very recently, a Rio de Janeiro councilwoman suggested that the death of a young man earlier in the week had been the latest act of police brutality. And she's quoted, and her name, by the way, just so I get that out of the way first, or just so I mention that first, was Marielle Franco. Okay, so she said, quote, "How many more must die for this war to end," end quote. And, she specifically called what's going on in Rio a war between, because she's referring to state violence. So she's talking about the state and how the state is treating the citizens. Councilwoman Marielle Franco wrote on Twitter, "The death of the young man, Matthias Melo, age 23, received modest news coverage. As I read what happened to Miss Franco, as I read what happened to her, notice the similarities between what's happening in Brazil and what happens in the United States. Because there are some very striking similarities. And actually, what happens in the United States is actually a lot worse. The death of so I read that already. He was, after all, a poor black man in a city where scores of poor black men are killed each year. Does that sound familiar? Many die at the hands of the police without much, if any, consequence. Does that sound familiar? And I said this is The Guardian. This is actually the New York Times. Because I'm going to read the Guardian article next. Miss Franco's killing shattered the cavalier attitude that prevails in much of this megacity in the face of rising violence. Shortly after 9 p.m., as the councilwoman was heading home from a meeting about empowering black women, assailants sprayed her car with bullets. They killed the 38-year-old rising political star and her driver, Anderson Pedro Gomez. The killings come nearly a month after President Michel Temer, and I might be mispronouncing his name, but Michel or Michael Temer, signed a decree giving the military vast powers to restore order in Rio de Janeiro state. It was the first time a Brazilian leader has used a constitutional provision that gives the military primary responsibility for security in a state since the return of democracy in the mid-1980s. So what's happening in Rio de Janeiro right now is a quintessential police state. It's actually worse than a police state in many ways, because this is the military that has police powers now. So it's a military police state. Okay, and Marielle Franco was a prominent human rights, and this isn't from the article, this is just based on my research, a prominent human rights activist and city councilwoman in her in the area in Rio, and she was from the local community, so she came up out of poverty. As mentioned in the article, she was a black woman. She was a member of the local LGBTQ community, and from one of the poorest neighborhoods in Rio, one of the poorest favelas. In 2016, she was elected to the Rio City Council under the Socialism and Liberty Party. So she was a socialist, she was a leftist, she was for her people, she was a member of the LGBTQ community, she was empowering women. So she was murdered. She was definitely assassinated. Here's the interesting part. She was a longtime critic of Brazil's police force, who have been linked to hundreds of killings and thousands of incidents of brutality in Rio's favelas. And every once in a while, I'll come across a story, an international story about what's going on in Rio. This is the first time I've covered what happens in that country, what happens in Brazil, what happens to Afro-Brazilians, and some of the plight of the Afro-Brazilians in that area. So let me continue with the article itself. Ms. Franco, who was elected to the city council in 2016, had been a vocal critic of the measure, saying that it threatened to raise bloodshed without addressing the root causes of violence. In recent days, she was appointed to play a key role on a council commission tasked with conducting oversight of the military intervention. So she was on a commission that was going to oversee this military intervention. And so someone who has a very strong leftist, very strong socialist, very strong voice in the community, and she was speaking out for the local people in that area, especially the local black and brown population in that area. You know, she became a target, clearly. As of Thursday afternoon, no one had been taken into custody. Surprise, surprise. But you know, let's give them a little bit of time. It just literally just happened recently. Let's see let's see if anything is done. If let's see, here's the thing. Rio and Brazil in general gets knocked for being a very corrupt area. But even if you look at America, America is no different. America is just as corrupt, and even some of the local areas in the United States, not like New York, Miami, Ferguson, the larger St. Louis. You have America and these smaller populations within America that are just as corrupt as Rio. Maybe the corruption isn't the same. I'm not saying the corruption is identical, okay, but the corruption is there. The corruption is present. You know, it's not like especially if you read some of the articles that I've read. If you read the recent article from BuzzFeed about how the New York Police Department covered up crimes that should have gotten people, you know, either arrested or at the very least lost their jobs, and it was basically covered up. If you read the DOJ reports from these different cities like Chicago and Ferguson and Baltimore, there's plenty of corruption to go around. So, you know, we cover up our crimes and we cover up our corruptions here in America, and we like to say, oh, look at how bad Rio is. Look at how bad Brazil is. I'm going to go over some numbers in terms of the number of people the police have killed in Rio in the past year, and you're going to see how it's actually worse in the United States. And as bad as it is in Rio, it's worse here. So let me continue with the article. Ms. Franco grew up in Marielle, a district in northern Rio de Janeiro that is among the largest in the city's constellation of favelas, largely impoverished districts that were initially settled by squatters. She gained prominence as a human rights activist, arguing that entrenched inequality and a trigger-happy police culture were at the root of the epidemic of violence that has afflicted the city for generations. She was elected to city council with more than 46,000 votes, a remarkable showing for a fresh face on the ballot. Ms. Franco was the only black female representative and one of 7 women on the 51-seat council. They're quoting someone now. She broke barriers that many black women in the periphery thought were intractable. Said, and I'm gonna be butchering this name, but said Ilona Zebo or something like that, I'm not sure. Executive director of the Agarape Institute, which studies public safety policies. And this is the end quote. She represented hope for many or for so many women who never felt like they had a voice. Ms. Franco's death comes amid rising criticism of the military intervention in Rio de Janeiro. On Tuesday, United Nations human rights officials issued a statement expressing, quote, profound concerns about the intervention, which they warned could lead to human rights violations. Sounds very similar to some of the things the United Nations has said in America. The United Nations said back in 2016 that African Americans were owed reparations. That completely fell on deaf ears, but you know, the United Nations has been calling out the United States as well for the U.S. human rights violations. Okay, so let that be. I'm gonna keep repeating that in a lot of these videos when it can be brought up. Okay, so let me see if there's anything from this New York Times article. No, that's the so okay, so that's the New York Times article. So let me go over to the Guardian article that I mentioned at first. Well, first, before I do that, let me tweet out a few things and make sure. Let me make sure everything looks good. Okay, so that looks good. Okay. All right, so let me continue. This is from The Guardian. Protests held across Brazil after Rio councilor shot dead. Okay, Marielle Franco, known for criticism of police tactics, was killed in apparent assassination. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this was a hit. This was an assassination. And even though this occurred in Rio de Janeiro, this could really happen anywhere. Okay, and we have to understand that anti-blackness and critics of the police state are vulnerable. Whether you're a critic of the police state in Rio, a critic of the police state in Israel, a critic of the police state in Turkey or Europe or in America. Okay, the police state, you have all of these pseudo democracies, these governments around the world that pretend that they are democratic, but they are democracies around the world really are failing, especially some of the larger democracies. Democracies are failing left and right because what's happening is capitalism is corrupting the integrity of a lot of these countries, and capitalism and class and race are all forcing countries, these democratic societies, to make anti-democratic and undemocratic decisions and undemocratic moves. And people who speak out against this, this is a broad coalition of people. You will have white people, you will have black people, but what you will typically find is the voices from the communities of the disadvantaged, the voices from the communities of the historically oppressed, the historically underrepresented. They typically face the greatest threat of retribution from the state. Okay, this is usually universal. Not to say that white people can't get it either, but typically you will find black and brown people are the most criticized and are the most attacked. Look at here in America, look at the difference in the reaction between Black Lives Matter protests and protests justified. And I want to say this just so people don't take me the wrong way. Justified protests, rightful protests that I support regarding not state violence, regarding gun violence and gun control in America, things that people should be protesting about. But notice how different the coverage is. Notice how you don't see the tanks. You don't see the tear gas. Okay, there is a very noticeable difference in reaction within society, within the media, among the politicians. There is a noticeable difference based on the color and the class, to an extent, of the people doing the protesting. They've even done studies, and I'm sure this is probably even true in Brazil. Okay, they've even done studies in America that has shown that Europeans are more supportive of protest when it's Europeans protesting, when it's white people protesting versus black people. Okay, so this is real. This schism is real. Okay, and this forces society to have different reactions. So let me stop ranting, and let me go to this Guardian article that I've been building up since the beginning of this live stream. So the article starts, and I saw there's a oh man, I wish I put this picture on the live stream. There was a huge protest in Brazil, in Rio. Protests were held across Brazil after a popular Rio city councilor and her driver were shot dead by two men in what appears to have been a targeted assassination. And this is my conjecture, and I can largely say this because I don't live in Rio. It was probably the cops. I'm just putting it out there. It was either the cops or it was people who support the cops. It was one of those groups, or not even, maybe even not the cops. It might have been the military. Okay, it was either the police, the military, or supporters of the police and military. Okay, it was fascist right wingers most likely who killed this sister. Okay, who killed this young activist, this young woman who rose up through the ranks, came out of poverty, and was active in her community. And the right wing fascists, whether you're talking about America, Israel, Brazil, or Europe, they're terrified of black and brown leftists. This is a consistent theme you look across the spectrum, regardless of what country you're looking at. They are terrified of black, brown, especially women, but even the men too, because they're terrified of the men because the men are very, we tend to be very aggressive in our approach. Okay, and so whether you are a black or brown man or woman, if you are a radical leftist, they're not going to like you. Okay, so let me, because stuff keeps coming up in my mind as I'm reading this. Man, this aggravates me. This really aggravates me. Marielle Franco, age 38, was a groundbreaking politician who had become a voice for disadvantaged people in the teeming favelas that are home to almost 1/4 of Rio de Janeiro's population. Okay, where grinding poverty, police brutality, and shootouts with drug gangs are routine. Something else. Rio and Brazil in general has the largest population of black people outside of the continent of Africa. Okay, more black people live in Brazil than any other Western country, more than Europe, more than the United States. Brazil has a large Afro-Brazilian black population. Okay, and they are railroaded. They are completely shut out. They are completely railroaded. Again, regardless of wherever you look, whether it's America, Brazil, wherever you look, they make sure they keep black people at the bottom. They make sure they keep black people at the bottom and keep everybody else on top. Okay, so continuing with the article, Richard Nunes, Rio's head of public security, said there would be a, quote, full investigation into the deaths, which came despite the military taking charge of policing in the city last month after a surge in violence. Two police officials told the Associated Press that two men in a car fired 9 shots into the vehicle carrying Franco and her driver, Anderson Pedro Gomez. On Wednesday night, a press officer in the back seat was injured but survived, the official said. So there was actually somebody else in the car with them. Both officials said it appeared Franco was targeted. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International condemned the killings, while friends, colleagues, and politicians paid tribute to Franco. Let me give me 1 second. I'm about to do something here. Okay. On Thursday afternoon, crowds gathered outside Rio de Janeiro's council chamber chanting, quote, "No one step backwards," end quote, ahead of a ceremony in honor of Franco inside. Many wept as her coffin was carried inside. The spontaneous demonstration brought together union members, feminists, leftists, and residents of the city's poor communities. Camila Pontes, age 30, she's my age, a communications officer, sheltered from the hot sun under an umbrella. She said, quote, "I feel lost, without hope. It is a very tough blow for anyone who fights for justice, for freedom, for equality." Franco was a gay black woman who defied the odds of Rio de Janeiro or Rio's politics to win the fifth highest vote among council members. When she was elected in 2016, she was an expert on police violence and had recently accused officers of being overly aggressive in searching residents of gang-controlled shantytowns. A member of a leftist party, Franco was also known for her social work in favelas. She was in her first term in office. And this is another quote from a communication student named Jefferson Barboza, age 21, who worked with Franco at the state legislature. He said, "She was a symbol of the politics we believe in. I have never been so scared. People are shocked with what happened. They did this to Mari, one of the most popular lawmakers in Rio. What will stop them from doing this to others?" So this is tragic, and this just goes to show you the uphill battle that leftists. Let me take it away from race for a split second. The uphill battle that leftists across the globe face. There is a incredibly powerful, incredibly well financed, in the millions, and if we're talking about globally, billions of dollars, propping up fascist right wing movements, fascist right wing politicians, and fascist right wing platforms. This is going on everywhere. Okay, I keep bringing this up because a lot of people do not want to talk about this. A lot of people want to sit back and pretend that this isn't happening and that this isn't a major threat to black people and minority groups, ethnic minority groups, black people, brown people, all over the world. Okay, this is a threat to democracy all over the world. You cannot have a society predicated on the domination of one ethnic group over the other and then sit back and call yourself democratic when you don't extend those democratic rights to other people, to other groups of people. And if you do, it's a democracy in name only. It's a democracy in theory. It's not really a democracy in action. Okay, because you are really threatened by those people having democratic power. You cannot be a democracy, a true democracy, and a democracy in name only at the same time. And when politicians are killed because of what they believe in, that is anti-democratic. It is anti-democratic. It is fascist, especially if these people, if the culprits are who I think they were, and if the culprits really were people from either the police or the military, okay, that is complete and total fascism. That happens in dictatorships. Okay, so the agenda that we need to establish, okay, is that we have to establish an agenda and we have to establish a mindset, okay, that says that this is not, whenever things like this crop up, this is not normal. This cannot be considered democracy. This needs to be called what it is. We need to stop playing games and act like this rise in right-wing fascism and white supremacy all over the world isn't a threat to tens of millions of people across the globe. And people want to sit back and just let it happen. A lot of people, I was about to say a lot of white folks, but even though you have black people who don't take this seriously. You have brown people who don't take this seriously because class is entered into the equation. Economics is entered into the equation. And what you will find is you will typically find a lot of black and brown people who have privilege and black and brown people who have a little bit of class privilege and a little bit of wealth. They will co-sign a lot of fuckery. And that's a problem. And I see that all over the place too. I see that in America. You have your so-called coons in America, and you have your apologists and your collaborators in America, but it's not isolated to America. You have apologists and collaborators in Europe. You have apologists and collaborators in Brazil, in Africa. Okay, so you have not only the right wing problem and the fascism problem, but you have the black and brown buffer of the class buffer, where you have a lot of you have some people who have slipped through the cracks and who have been allowed to enter into the right wing, the right wing machine, so to speak, for the lack of a better term, and they feel disassociated from the poor, disadvantaged masses that they originate from. Okay, so this is needs to be called out. This is a problem. This is a problem all over the place, and I feel bad for bad for the people of Rio. I feel bad for this for Miss Franco's family, her friends, everybody she was fighting for, and I hope they stay in the streets. And just looking purely at the pictures of the protest, it looks like it easily several 100,000 were out in the streets. And from what I heard, people were protesting all over Rio, so it might have gone over 1 million at some point in time. I haven't actually looked up to see what the actual numbers were. But yeah, this is tragic, man. And this could honestly, the reason I'm talking about this story is not only because I like talking about international stories that affect people of color, but I'm talking about this story because this could happen here. This does happen here. Matter of fact, and not could, it does. Okay, I did a story not too long ago, I want to say like a month and a half ago, about Mohied and Moye, the former Black Lives Matter activist, known for jumping over the tape at the white supremacist rally and yanking the flag out of the white supremacist hands. He was found dead. Now they don't know what happened to him, but they don't know what happened to her either. They're speculating. What happened to her is just as much speculation as what happened to Moye. You have other Black Lives Matter activists who have been murdered. Darren Seals, he that was definitely an assassination. With Moye, we're not really sure, but with Seals, this dude was burnt in a car. Okay, he was definitely murdered. That was definitely a hit. So even though she was a city councilwoman and a lot of the Black Lives Matter people weren't in office, okay, the similarities are striking. Okay, so there's not that much of a difference between what's happening right now in Rio and what happens in the United States to black activists here in the United States. So, we might be separated by language. We might be separated by culture. We might be separated by vast distances in land. But we're really not separated a lot of times in our societal placement. We're not separated in our societal placement, and we're not separated in terms of what we face with regards to state violence and white supremacy. We are very, very much, we have a lot in common with them when it comes to that. We have a lot in common with them in terms of some of the things that they advocate for. She was a leftist. She was a feminist. We have leftists and we have feminists over here in the United States. So we it's there's nothing more I can really say about the story, but yeah, I just wanted to definitely talk about that on this Friday show. So let me continue. Let me continue with the stream.